What's up, guys? This is Pink Across. Today I'm going to be talking about how to effectively test your teams. The examples I'm going to be using are from Gen 9 OU, but this applies to all tiers and generations of Pokemon. Remember that if you're enjoying this type of content, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let's get right into the video. The first thing you need to know is that testing is the king of team building. However you think your team should do, whether you expect it to do really well or very poorly, testing will determine what should be changed about your team and how good your team is. Results over many games is always what makes a team good or bad. Earlier this generation, I made an Alomomola team that peaked number 1. When I initially looked at this team, I thought it was very bad, and it turned out to really have a lot of strengths that I didn't foresee. So really, if you have a team that you're not sure about, test it before you dismiss it. And also, if you have a team that you think is really strong, test it before you just assume it's good to bring to a tournament. There are some things I advise you do before testing to save your time and make your testing more productive. Number 1 is to make multiple versions. Often in the team building process, especially in the later stages, you're not exactly sure what's going to fit your team, and it's okay to have many different versions. For instance, this team clearly needs a water resist, but who knows what that could end up being. Maybe a Rotom Wash, maybe a Volcanion, maybe a Walking Wake. But you could have many different versions of this team with many different water resists, and one of them might perform a lot better than the others. If you immediately see that a version isn't working out, you can switch to a different version and see if that works better. Number 2, fix obvious errors. If you don't have a Dark Resist, you're going to lose to Kingambit. If you have an entire team slower than Dragapult and no Ghost Resist, you're going to lose to Dragapult. There are some things you don't need to test for you to see that changes need to be made. If you see something like this, make the change, adjust your team, and don't waste your time playing games to find out that you have obvious fixes that need to be made. Number 3, avoid assumptions. You never know what's going to happen in the team building process, so don't get attached to any Pokemon on your team. Just because it performed well in some of the initial tests, or just because it's your favorite Pokemon, doesn't mean it has a place on your final team. Number 4, consider using a base team. What I mean by this is, if you have a team that's already proven successful in the past and you're trying to test a particular Pokemon, you can replace something on that team for that Pokemon if they have a similar role and see how well it does. For example, if you were trying to see if Choice Banded Hoopa-U is good and overused, you could place it on a team that previously had a Hisuian Samurott with a Choice Band. Even though it's not going to set spikes and it doesn't exactly provide the same utility, they're similar enough in their roles that you can see if Hoopa does anything. If it's not putting in a lot of work, you can determine it's probably not viable, but if it does reasonably well, it's worth taking the time to build a team around to support it more specifically and going through the time to test. Alright, it's testing time. The first thing you want to do when testing is pay attention to which Pokemon put in work and which don't. It may seem obvious, but just look out for which things on your team aren't doing a whole lot. It may be easy to find some bias in yourself if you've had Pokemon that you really like or have done well in the past, but this team may not suit them. Number 2, be aware of what I call offensive bias when testing. One thing a lot of people do is they'll base how good a Pokemon is based on how many kills it's getting, and this is not a great method. Some Pokemon may be really good defensive walls that work well on your team, and you may be underestimating their value just because they're not getting kills. Similarly, if you have only one offensive Pokemon on your team or only one wall breaker, it will seem really good because it's the only thing on your team that can get kills. So you may think it's the only thing on the team doing anything, when in reality it might be a problem. Number 3, be creative with your solutions. You might see issues with your team that you don't know how to fix, and maybe going to the lower tiers for a solution will give you exactly what you're looking for. Perhaps you have a team where you really need a water absorb Pokemon, so you immediately put on Ogerpon Wellspring and decide to just accept the fact that your team's a little bit weak to Corviknight. Well, there are lower tier options. Maybe a Volcanion would fit a lot better here. Don't limit yourself to just the OU tier, it'll make you a much weaker team builder. Number 4, play lots of games. If a team seems good, keep testing. If you see obvious issues arise in just a few games, you don't need to test further to fix it. With errors, be very liberal about what you consider needing a fix, because if you see an issue even a 1 or 2 times, it's probably going to continue to happen. But if a team is performing well, don't just say you're all set after 5 or so games. You may just have not run into the Pokemon that's going to really screw you up, or the certain core that your entire team is weak to. Before calling a team good and being done with it, be ready to bring it to a tournament, make sure you've tested thoroughly. I would say at least 25 games on the ladder before you can be confident in a team, although even more is better. Number 5, sometimes the best idea is to just scrap your team. You can get really locked into certain mindsets and just get stuck with a team that isn't very good. Now, for the sake of comedy, I have a obviously terrible team here, but in a lot of cases you may have a team that's decent looking, but you just can't fit everything you wanted to onto the team, and a fresh start might be really helpful to do. Even if you've spent a lot of time correcting a team, it could be that the initial idea just isn't working and you need to start over. So when can you finally say the team is good? How will you know when you're done testing and done making corrections? Well, a team is good when it has these things. Number 1, lots of good matchups. Now, something that's important is that balanced teams are going to have a lot more consistently good matchups than hyper offense or stall, which are a little bit more matchup fishy. So if you have a balanced team that's winning 7 out of 10 matchups, I would say that's a little disappointing, and you want to aim for at least 8 or 9. But a hyper offense team that gets 7 out of 10 matchups is pretty good. Hyper offense and stall are inherently inconsistent, but the matchups they win are often very strong wins, while the matchups they lose are similarly often very strong losses. Number 2, able to handle bad matchups. It's okay to have bad matchups, but you should probably have some outs against them. If you feel completely helpless versus a certain playstyle, it's probably revealing greater underlying weaknesses with your team. Number 3, forgiving of misplays and hacks. Every game isn't going to go perfect, and your team should be able to account for this. If one poorly timed static on Zapdos, one critical hit, or one unfortunate missed prediction is going to cause your entire team to fall apart, it's not a very good team. Now, of course, sometimes hacks and crucial plays do end up being the deciding factor in a game, but if you notice time and time again that the slightest thing going wrong makes your team fall apart, it's not very good. Just because you can go after the game and say, well, my team would have won had I done this, doesn't necessarily mean it's not the team's fault. Any good team has some allowance for mistakes, misplays, and hacks. And if you see that this is consistently a reason why you're losing, one little thing going wrong, then probably it's the team's fault. Now, that being said, if your entire game plan is consistently wrong, other players are seeing good results with this team, or you're making major mistakes constantly, it could be that it's your playing and not the team. But for the most part, little understandable errors leading to the entire team falling apart is a very bad sign. One thing I will say is that this is a bit playstyle dependent. Offense teams are very, very unforgiving to mistakes, as are stall teams. So if you're playing offense or stall and one mistake is costing you the game, that could be still a strong team. Number 4, the team utilizes every Pokemon. If you have something on your team that's very rarely coming out, your team is probably not performing very well. It could be this Pokemon is for specific matchups, but Generally speaking, you want this Pokemon to be used, and if you're not using every one of your 6 slots, your team is not reaching its full potential. If your team is still performing decently, that speaks very well about the other 5 members of your team, but I highly recommend replacing the 6 that's not doing so much. Number 5, your team can handle unexpected threats. You're not going to be able to prepare for every lower tier Pokemon that comes your way. If your team is solid and has good structure, core, and synergy, probably you're going to be solid against things that you never even considered when building in the first place. If you notice that one unconventional set or a lower tier Pokemon often spells doom for your team, you may have spent too much time preparing for particular OU threats and not enough time making your team work well together and be structurally sound. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and this helps with your future team testing. Let me know if you guys would be interested in seeing me take a team from one of my viewers, going through the entire testing and improving process. Now, one thing I will say is this would be definitely a bit of a longer video. Even if I were to make a lot of edits and cuts, I could see a team testing video going on for 45 minutes to an hour and a half at least. But let me know if you guys would be interested in that type of thing in the comments below. Also, I am still offering one-on-one tutoring, so if you're interested, the link to sign up will be in the description. Have a great day, guys.